Greetings to all. Welcome to our Salesforce CPQ video series. In today's session, we will be looking at guided selling. I am Sudha Sundaram. I have 12 plus years of experience, predominantly in the Salesforce and the Agile world. My last position was at Citi as Vice President for Program Management of Salesforce programs. I am 11x Salesforce.com certified and a Trailblazer mentor. Here is my LinkedIn and the Twitter handle. If you would like to follow me, please feel free to. In today's session, we would be looking at what is guided selling, use case, and how to configure it. Many successful sales reps just don't sell products, but they guide their customers in selecting the right products to buy. Guided selling in Salesforce CPQ enables this. With guided selling, users can quickly and easily sort through a large product catalog to find what exactly they are looking for. At the beginning of the code creation process, while the sales rep is trying to add products, they are presented with a guided selling screen, as you see in the screenshot here, which asks a series of targeted questions to help them navigate the product catalog. And that is our first step of our guided selling process. Each answer can dynamically affect the questions that follow. After clicking Suggest, guided selling will return all the products that matches the customer needs. In simple terms, Salesforce CPQ reviews the answers and shows the Add Products page with a list of products that match their responses. Now let's look at the guided selling components. Guided selling process contains three components. The first is the code process. So this object defines how the prompt appears and how it adds items based on the user's input. The code process record contains a related list for process inputs. These process input records are the questions and possible answers that the guided selling prompt shows. Each process input represents one question. The process input record contains a related list for process input conditions. You can define process input conditions so that the guided selling prompt only shows the process input in response to the values of other process inputs. This feature is useful if you want to create a complex guided selling prompt that guides users down several paths based on their needs. It also keeps your guided selling prompt organized by showing only required questions. A quick example here could be, say for example, we have a question about product family, and we have several product families in our catalog. So based on the user's input for that particular question, say for example, the person chooses software, then we show a series of questions related to software. And if person chooses a different product family, then we filter different questions and show accordingly. So the process input conditions are used for this purpose. Now, let us look at a use case to get a better understanding of how this works. We want the sales rep to have ability to understand what type of products the customers are interested in. Based on the answer, we want to ask a few more questions. For example, if a customer is interested in hardware products, we further ask what type of hardware. And say if customer says CPU, we further ask the customer which processor they would like and filter the precise products accordingly. Say if the customer has picked smart services instead of CPU, we would like to know which region they would be using this product so we can show appropriate products for selection. Let us now see how we use this Salesforce CPQ guided selling process to accomplish this particular use case. We will see how we use the code process for the prompt to appear, how we use process inputs for each of this question and its related answers, and how we utilize the process input condition for dynamically showing a particular question based on the answer from the previous question. Let us briefly look at the steps needed for accomplishing this. So first, we would go ahead and create product fields based on the fields that are needed for our questions. We would create mirror fields in the process input object. And then we would go ahead and update the product field and the input field that are available in the process input object, the pick list with the values that would include the fields that we have created for this particular guided selling process. Then we would go ahead and create the code process for the prompt to appear. And we would go ahead and create the process inputs for each of the question and its related answers that we would like. Then we would go ahead and create the process input conditions for dynamically showing a particular question based on the input from a previous question. The final step is to copy ID section from the code process URL and paste it to the code process ID field in the code. Please note that in actual implementations, we recommend using Workflow or Process Builder to automatically add the record ID to the code process ID field. Now, let us see how we create these steps needed for the guided selling process. First, create fields at the product level that the guided selling prompt can filter through. In this case, we need product family, the field which is already available here, hardware type, CPU, and region. Let's quickly see how this appears in the UI. I've already created these product fields and added it to the page layout. So the product family is the standard field, which was already here. I've not made any changes to it. I created a field for hardware type to include CPU, desktop, laptop, printer, projector, and smart devices. And a CPU field to include processors, i5 and i7. And the regions for Europe, UK, and US. I've already gone ahead and created these products for demo purposes in the product object. So you would see the hardware type, the CPU, and the region pick list. Moving on, the next step is to create mirror pick list fields on the process input object. It is very important that these API names are exactly the same as in the products in order to ensure that we have proper conditions met. The only difference here is for the standard field in the product, we chose product family, where the API name is just family, but while we create it in the process input object, we would still go ahead and add an __C. And every other field, the API name remains the same as in the products object. Next, we'll go ahead and update the product field and the input field pick list on the process input object. So this will link our input fields in the guided selling code process to the product fields that we created earlier to make a match. Let us quickly go ahead and see how I've done this. So if you go to the product field, you will note that I have added the fields that we created as the pick list values here. The region, CPU, hardware type, and product family are included. I have done the same to the input field as well. Just to quickly show you that, I have included, again, the region, CPU, hardware type, and family to the input field pick list values. Please note that the fields that we created in the process input are only for backend reference, and we don't have to add them to the page layout. These fields are the product family or the CPU, region, or the hardware type fields that we created. We just do not need to add them to the page layout on the process input object. Now moving on to the code process. So let us see how to create a code process. Navigate to the code process object. You would see a new button, and if you click on it, you would be able to create a new code process. For demo purposes, I've already created a code process called guided selling here. So this will provide a guided selling window and establish the link between the process input fields and our product fields to be able to return appropriate products based on the responses provided. So if you notice here, I've given a process name, which you can name according to your business needs. I've just given a guided selling as my process name. I've checked this box for guided only. So select the checkbox if you want the codes to covered by this process that you're creating as the guided selling option. It's pretty much those two fields are important here. Next, let us create a process input by going to the related tabs on the code process. You'll see the process inputs here, and by clicking on new. So these records are the questions and possible answers that the guided selling prompt will show. If you see here, I've already created 4 process inputs for each of the questions we want to appear in the guided selling prompt. So let's look at the first process input we had to create. That was about the product family, right? So since this is our first question, we do not have any condition for this question to appear on the prompt. So every time a guided selling prompt opens, we want this to be our first question. So if you look at it, the input name I've given as product family, and this is the question that we want to ask in the guided selling prompt, which goes under the label. So what type of products are you looking for? And I have given the input field as family__C, and this is going to give us the list of answers as the product family options that we want. And the condition met is all. And under the product filter, we are going to check the answer against the product family of the product so that we could retrieve all the products that matches the input from the user. So the product field is product family and the operator is equals. So typically in the input field, if you look at Salesforce CPQ evaluates this field to determine the possible answers that the users can select. So that's what family__C is going to do here. And the product field, the Salesforce CPQ evaluates how this field's value compares to the user's answer to this process input relative the operator field. So that's where the product family and the operator comes into play. The conditions met defines whether any or all your process input conditions must evaluate to true for Salesforce CPQ to show matching products on the Add Products page. So this is how we create the process input, and I have repeated the same steps for the other questions as well. So I have one for hardware type to check which type of hardware products you're looking for. And similarly, I have one for which processes are you interested in. This is for CPU. And we are checking that against the CPU__C input field. And the product field is also the same. So this is why we created the fields in the products as well as the process input, so that we could link the answer to the products field and get the products filtered accordingly. And the final one I created was for the smart devices to know which region will this product be used in, so that we could filter products according to the region. So next, now that we've created all the questions in place and all the answers and how to check the answers against the product field and retrieve it. If the user wants a question to appear based only on the answer to the previous question, we need to create process input condition on the questions we want to control. Say, for example, we want to ask which hardware type only if the product the customer is interested is hardware, not for the rest. And we want to ask what processor only if the hardware type picked was CPU. And we want to ask which region only if the hardware type answer was smart devices. So we have the conditions involved here for the question to appear. So to accomplish this, we need to have process input conditions. So let's see how to get this done. To navigate to the process input condition, select the process input, and click on the related tabs, and you would see the process input conditions here. By clicking on new, we will be able to create the new process input condition needed for this. So this one, our process input was about the hardware type, only if the response to our first question is hardware. So there's a condition involved, as we want this particular question to appear only if the response to the first one is hardware. So let's see how we have created this condition. So I've given the condition name as the hardware product, and the question that should appear is about the hardware type. And what is it related to is based on the previous question, which is about the product family. So only if the product family is equal to hardware, we want this particular process input to show up on the guided selling prompt. So just to summarize, so process input, this is the process input that appears in response to this particular condition that we are creating. So here we want the hardware type question to appear. And the master process input, the value of this process input determines whether this process input condition evaluates to true. In our case, this is the product family, as we are going to make this particular question on the hardware type appear based on its response. The value field, it selects the possible value for your master process input. Salesforce CPQ evaluates this value in relation to your operator field. If the evaluation is true, the process input condition evaluates to true. Similarly, moving on to our next condition, since CPU also has a condition to ask question on the processor, only if the hardware type was CPQ, we would go ahead and create a condition for that as well. So if you notice here, I have a condition for CPU hardware, and the process input, the question we want to show is about the processor only if the hardware type question's answer was CPU. So we have a condition created for this. And I have a similar one created for smart devices to show the smart device region question only if the hardware type was smart devices. So this is how we go ahead and create the process input conditions if we need to use them. So finally, after we have created the code process, the process inputs, which are the questions and answers and how to link them, and the process input condition if you want to change how your questions appear based on the input of a previous question, the final step is to copy the ID of the the code process that you've created from the URL and paste the value into the code process ID field on the code or the code line group. So this shows the, guided selling prompt created by the user. So if you notice, this is the ID that I'm talking about, which is on the code process. I went ahead and populated it on my code for the demo purposes. In actual implementation, we would ideally use a workflow or a process builder to automatically add the record ID to the code process ID field. So now let's go ahead and see guided selling prompt in action. Let's click on Edit Lines. And click on Add Products. This is the guided selling prompt that the user would see. So the first question here is, what type of products are you looking for? Say, for example, let's pick hardware here. And the next question, because we had a condition created, appears, which type of hardware product are you looking for? Now, say, for example, I say CPU. Again, we have a condition here. Because we picked CPU, the next question that comes here is, which processor are you interested in? Say, for example, I pick i7 and say suggest. So instead of going through the large product catalog, the user is given the precise products that match the conditions that the input was matched to. So all that we see here is product family hardware and the products that are related to CPU hardware and the processor which match to i7. Now let's go and see another condition. Let's say cancel. Let's pick add products again and go to the guided selling prompt. And now let me pick hardware. Let me choose smart devices and let me pick US here and see suggest. Now all the products that we see here are of type smart devices and those devices which could be used in the US. So that's how we get through the guided selling process. To summarize, in today's session, we looked at what is guided selling, a typical use case, and how to configure the code process, process inputs, and process input conditions. Thank you for listening. Hope you found the session informative. Thank you, Apex Hours, for giving us the opportunity to host this session here.